After the fall of Dalmatia, the first city, swallowed by the sea, the Nodites wandered north and east. Survivors of a shattered world, they gathered again in a new land and founded the city of Dilmun. It became their cultural and racial stronghold, a beacon for what remained of their ancient identity. But time is relentless. Generations passed. The children of the prince's staff grew too many in number, and the land around Dilmun could no longer sustain them. They reached out to the nearby tribes, the Andanites and the Sangics, intermarrying, expanding, blending. And with that expansion came a crisis, the slow dissolution of unity. The elders saw it coming. Something had to be done, so they called a council, a gathering of the tribes. There, a man named Bablot, descendant of Nod, rose to speak. He offered a vision to build a temple, not just a place of worship, but a monument, something massive, powerful, eternal. A tower, like nothing the world had seen. It would be a symbol of their greatness, a reminder to all peoples that the blood of the gods still walked the earth. Some wanted the structure built in Dilmun, but memories of the sea's wrath lingered. Dalmatia had sunk beneath the waves. Few were willing to take that risk again, so Bablot's plan was approved, and with it, construction began, a new city rising around the tower, a new name, Bablot. In time, it would be known as Bablod, and finally, Babel. But the dream was already splintering. From the beginning, they disagreed. Some saw the tower as a monument to racial superiority, a stone memory of Nodite history. Others wanted it to be a center of art and commerce, the heart of Dilmun culture. And a few, only a few, believed it should be a place of atonement, a sacred site to honor the father of all and to redeem their race for its role in the Caligastia rebellion. These religionists were voted down. The others didn't want to remember rebellion. They refused to carry the weight of ancestral guilt. And so, debate turned to division. Division gave way to anger. Anger broke into violence. The non-combatants, the worshippers, fled south. The rest remained and fought, until nearly nothing was left. The great tower never reached completion. And though centuries passed, the ruins endured. A second attempt was made 12,000 years ago by the Andites, a blend of Nodites and Adamites, who tried to raise a new temple atop the bones of the old. But it, too, collapsed under its own weight. Not from war this time, but from pride. The vision was not strong enough to sustain the stone, and thus the land came to be known as Babel, a name forever tied to confusion, to ambition without unity, and to the echo of a tower that never touched the heavens. And so it was, in the passing days of their great journey westward, the travellers, Jesus of Nazareth, Ganid the youth, and Gonod the noble father, set foot upon the island of Crete, not to preach, not to conquer, but to walk, to climb the jagged spines of ancient hills, to play beneath the open firmament, to breathe in the wild air of the earth, unburdened. It was a Sabbath of the soul, divinely chosen. Crete, in that age, was a land despised. Its people were considered low, coarse, dishonest. The tongues of surrounding nations spat the name Cretan as if it were a curse. Yet he, the concealed architect of worlds, did not see them as beasts or burdens. He saw them as brothers, and through subtle conversation, through unseen acts of gentleness and wisdom, he raised many among them to higher realms of thought and living. Seeds were sown, not of doctrine, but of destiny. Thus was the island prepared for the coming thunder of truth, when the gospel would march from Jerusalem like fire across the sea. He loved them deeply, even as later words from Paul would cast them in shadow. The Son of Man had already illuminated their worth. Upon the mountainside, alone beneath the heavens, Jesus spoke with God at length of things eternal. It was their first deep communion on the matter of religion, and God, astonished by the vastness and purity of the truth laid before him, declared, "No wonder the boy believes everything you tell him, but I never knew they had such a religion even in Jerusalem, much less in Damascus." Here, for the first time, the elder proposed a mighty path, that Jesus return with them to India, to teach, to awaken, to kindle the flame in a land ancient and seeking. Ganid's heart leapt with hope, but the master, bound by forces unspoken, by purpose unseen, remained silent, for his hour had not yet come. On another day, young Ganid, ever bold in spirit, confronted the quiet grandeur of his teacher. He asked, "Why have you not devoted yourself to the work of a public teacher?" And Jesus, timeless in patience, answered as one who speaks not merely to the present, but to the unfolding arc of all ages. "My son, everything must await the coming of its time. You are born into the world, but no amount of anxiety and no manifestation of impatience will help you to grow up. You must in all such matters wait upon time. Time alone will ripen the green fruit upon the tree. Season follows season, and sundown follows sunrise only with the passing of time. I am now on the way to Rome with you and your father, and that is sufficient for today. My tomorrow is wholly in the hands of my Father in heaven." And then he revealed to him the saga of Moses, the great prophet who waited 40 years in the wilderness, not in exile, but in preparation. Thus was the way of all true power, not to rush, but to be forged. But there came an event in Fair Havens that would mark Ganid forever. On the dusty road, a slave girl cried out, attacked by a drunken brute, a man sunken into madness. Without pause, Jesus surged forth, interposing himself between predator and prey. His right arm, iron-willed and born of spirit and sinew, held the raving man at bay, while the girl clung to him in trembling safety. The beast struck at air, raging against the calm force of righteousness, and Jesus stood, immovable, unflinching, until the fury burned itself out. Ganid moved to join the fray, fire in his soul, but his father restrained him. There was no need. Mercy had already triumphed. Though they could not speak the girl's tongue, their actions transcended language. She wept, and they walked her home. This perhaps was the closest Jesus ever came to physical conflict in his mortal life. And yet, even in this, his restraint was the sharper blade. Later, Ganid could not contain his fury. "Why," he asked, "did you not strike him? Should he not suffer at least as many blows as he gave?" Jesus, with divine patience, explained a higher law, one not of retribution, but of redemption. Ganid struggled to accept it, but the memory remained. And in that moment, the seed was sown in him, a seed that would one day move against the cruel caste chains of his own homeland. Thus ended their time in Crete, not with fanfare, not with miracles, but with silent triumph. For in that island's soil had been planted truths that would bear fruit across centuries, nurtured not by power, but by presence. And the Son of Man, clothed in humility, yet veiled in cosmic authority, continued ever forward, toward Rome, toward destiny, toward the cross. In the 100th year of Adam's sojourn on earth, a powerful figure emerged from the western lands, a man named Serapetetia, newly risen to lead the Syrian confederation of the Nodite tribes after the passing of his father. Serapetetia was no ordinary chieftain. He carried in his veins a noble lineage, descended from a former chief of Dalmatia's health commission and a brilliant woman of the ancient blue race. Generations of leadership had refined his bloodline, producing a man of intelligence, charisma, and ambition, a man born to influence. In his early dealings with the Garden of Eden, Serapetetia found himself deeply moved by the noble mission of Adam and Eve. The vision of planetary uplift and spiritual awakening stirred something in him. Upon securing his leadership among the Nodites, he boldly declared his intent to align his people with the Edenic cause. His tribes, recognizing both his wisdom and the promise of the garden, followed him almost in unison. Adam, often burdened by the slow pace of progress, was uplifted by this news. The most intelligent and capable of their neighboring peoples were now willing collaborators. Serapetetia and his council were received with joy and gratitude in Adam and Eve's home. Over time, Serapetetia proved himself an exceptional aid to Adam, a man of integrity and sincere purpose. Unbeknownst to him, however, his noble intentions were being subtly influenced by the unseen hands of Caligastia, the former planetary prince who had long sown chaos from the shadows. As associate chairman of Eden's Commission on Tribal Relations, Serapetetia took a leading role in outreach and planning. He spent many hours in council with Adam, and especially with Eve. Over the course of years, an idea began to take shape, bold, expedient, and seemingly noble in intent. Serapetetia proposed that instead of waiting centuries to grow a sufficient population of the violet race, perhaps a mixed child, born of both Nodite and Adamic lineage, could serve as a catalyst for progress. Such a child, raised within the sacred environment of the garden, could bridge the gap between the Edenic mission and the surrounding tribes. Serapetetia argued that the Nodites, being the most advanced and cooperative of the native races, would naturally follow such a leader. His logic was compelling, and his passion sincere, but his greatest flaw was his impatience. He longed to see the fruit of their mission within his own lifetime. He reminded Eve that even Adam, for all his strength, was often discouraged by their limited progress. And so, the idea took root in Eve's heart. Over 5 years, it quietly matured in secret. Eventually, Eve agreed to a private meeting with Kano, the chief of a nearby friendly Nodite settlement. Kano, too, was a man of extraordinary intellect and bearing, a living echo of the noble beings once part of the prince's staff. On an autumn evening, beneath the fading twilight not far from the garden, Eve met Kano for the first time. She was struck by his beauty, his passion, and his belief in their shared purpose. Kano, like Serapetetia, saw in this plan a genuine opportunity to uplift the world. In that vulnerable moment, Eve made her choice. Stirred by flattery, hope, and a deep yearning to contribute something tangible to their mission, she stepped outside the divine plan. In believing she could hasten the upliftment of humanity, she acted on her own initiative. Before she fully realized what had occurred, the deed was done. The consequences of this single act would ripple through the history of Urantia. What began in sincerity and idealism would culminate in sorrow and loss, but it would not end in defeat. For even in the darkest turns of human misjudgment, the seeds of redemption are never beyond the reach of divine mercy. In the sun-baked lands of ancient Mesopotamia, among the scattered stones and silent ruins of the fabled birthplace of Abraham, walked a solitary figure. The air was dry, the wind gentle, carrying with it the faint scent of time itself. Amid the broken columns and the fragments of once mighty walls, he moved with quiet reverence, pausing often to study the cuneiform inscriptions etched into crumbling tablets. His fingers, calloused yet tender, traced the grooves of symbols that told the stories of forgotten kings and ancient peoples. It was Jesus of Nazareth, though at this time he was known simply as Joshua the Teacher, a traveler among travelers, a guide to those who did not yet know how close they stood to divinity. His companions, Gonod and his son Ganid of India, watched as this humble man immersed himself in the history of a people long gone. There was a light in his eyes, not just of curiosity, but of love. For even among ruins, Jesus saw the living spirit of humanity reaching upward through the ages. Their caravan had paused in and what was meant to be a brief rest became a stay of several weeks, extended at Jesus' request. He wandered the ancient paths not as a mere tourist, but as a soul communing with the footprints of civilization, seeking in their dust the early echoes of the Father's guiding hand. He was not content to simply pass through history. He wanted to understand it, feel it, honor it. During this time, Ganid, bright, eager, and full of questions, sat with Jesus to discuss the deeper things of life. One day, beneath the shade of a withered fig tree near the ruins, they spoke of the difference between knowledge, wisdom, and truth. Jesus listened patiently, speaking gently, and quoted the words of the Hebrew sage. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And with all you're getting, get understanding. Ganid's eyes lit up, not only from the words, but from the presence of the one who embodied them. But the days passed swiftly, as they always do when hearts are full. The time came to part. On the river shore at Charax, tears welled but did not fall. Ganid embraced Jesus, saying, I love you, for I think the Father in heaven must be something like you. Gonod too thanked the teacher who had changed them both. And Jesus, standing tall in the morning light, blessed them. Peace be upon you, and may the blessing of the Father in heaven ever abide with you. As the boat carried them away, Jesus watched in silence. They would never see each other again in this world, and neither father nor son would ever know that the gentle teacher who had walked with them among the ruins of was the very Son of Man, who would later shake the world from the hills of Galilee. Ganid returned to India and grew into a noble and influential man. He carried with him the living seeds of truth, truth planted in quiet moments, in laughter and long talks, in dusty courtyards and ancient ruins. And though he would one day hear of a Jewish teacher crucified in Palestine, though the teachings would seem hauntingly familiar, he never knew they came from the same gentle hands that once lifted a cuneiform shard to the light and smiled. And so ended a quiet chapter in the life of the Master, a mission hidden to the world, yet rich with eternal meaning. The mission of Joshua the teacher. In the heart of Eden's golden bloom, when the garden stood in its fullest splendor, a moment of profound significance unfolded. At high noon, from the courts of Jerusalem, two luminous seraphic transports descended in silent grace. They carried within them the hope of a world, the material son and daughter Adam and Eve. Without herald or fanfare, these celestial vessels came to rest near the sacred temple of the Universal Father. The air was thick with reverence as celestial hosts watched in solemn anticipation. Within the hallowed shrine, unseen forces wove their work, rematerializing these planetary uplifters. For 10 days, energies unknown to mortal minds labored to shape their new bodies, restoring them to the form destined for their divine mission. Then, as one, they awakened, two beings of light and destiny, bound forever in the sacred service of upliftment. It was their nature never to be apart, for Adam and Eve, like all material sons and daughters, were designed to serve together, never alone. As their eyes opened to the new world, the first faces they beheld were Van and his loyal companion Amadon, two steadfast figures who had long safeguarded Eden through the long and trying years of planetary isolation. These were the first to greet them, the first to stand before them in welcome. The language of Eden had been cultivated by Van and Amadon, an evolved form of an ancient Andonic tongue. With great care, they had devised an alphabet of 24 letters, dreaming that it would become the common speech of the world as Eden's culture spread. And Adam, prepared for his mission long before his arrival, spoke to Amadon in this very language, addressing the faithful son of Andon in his own words, a moment of profound kinship and unity. Then, like the stirring of winds before a great storm, excitement surged through the garden. Runners burst forth calling in joyous cries, "Let loose the birds! Let them carry the word, the promised son has come." From hilltops and distant settlements, white-winged messengers took to the sky, their flight a living proclamation of the new age. For generations, devoted believers had tended these birds, keeping them in readiness for this very moment. As the tidings spread, multitudes made their way to Eden. From the surrounding lands, tribesmen and seekers, pilgrims and faithful ones, came to witness the arrival of their world's new rulers. On the northern mound, a great assembly gathered. There, beneath the open sky, Adam and Eve stood before their people for the first time. Van, who had carried the burden of planetary stewardship for more than 150,000 years, at last relinquished his authority. Before the great host of Eden, Adam and Eve took their solemn oath, pledging their allegiance to the Most Highs of Nor-Latiadek and to Michael of Nebadon. As the vows were spoken, their forms were adorned in robes of deep majesty, woven by hands still preserving the fading arts of Dalmatia. A new age had begun, and then, from the heights of the celestial realms, a voice rang forth. Gabriel, the bright and morning star, proclaimed the second judgment roll call of Urantia. His words resounded across the lands, heralding the resurrection of sleeping souls, marking the passage of one era and the birth of another. The dispensation of the prince had ended, the age of Adam had begun. But even as Eden rejoiced, shadows loomed upon the horizon. The planet Adam and Eve had come to uplift remained fractured, uncertain, bearing the scars of betrayal and rebellion. The path before them would not be easy, and trials yet unknown awaited. Yet on this day, beneath the radiant light of a high noon sun, hope stood ascendant, and Urantia's new rulers stepped forward to meet their destiny. Welcome back to the channel. Today we revisit the first garden, not as myth, but as memory. You've heard of Adam and Eve before, but have you ever wondered what their daily life was truly like? According to the Urantia Book, Adam and Eve were far more than symbolic figures. They were real, celestial beings on a divine mission to uplift humanity. Their home was vast. Over 5 square miles of sacred land was set aside for the Adamic family grounds. And surrounding this Edenic sanctuary, space was prepared for over 300,000 of their projected pure-line descendants. But the divine plan was tragically interrupted. Only the first buildings were ever completed. Before their family could fully expand, the garden was vacated, the Edenic mission disrupted. Their first child, Adamson, marked the beginning of a new race on Urantia, the violet race. Eve bore 63 children before the default, 32 daughters and 31 sons. By the time Adam and Eve were forced to leave the garden, their family numbered 1,647 pure-line descendants across 4 generations, and even after leaving Eden, they gave birth to 42 more children. Eve, deeply knowledgeable in the chemistry of life, prepared her children's food with care. They did not consume animal milk. Instead, she nourished them with nut milks and fruit juices, perfectly blended for growth. Their diet consisted mainly of ripened fruits, nuts, and grains, prepared not with fire, but with sunlight, nature, and divine energy. Adam and Eve themselves partook of light and energy, drawing sustenance from space emanations and the tree of life, and their very bodies reflected this otherworldly nature. They shimmered with soft light. Modest in their attire, they wore little during the day, but at night they cloaked themselves in wraps. Only the light radiating from their heads remained visible, the origin of the halo in ancient art, forever linking divine presence with luminous crowns of glory. They were gifted with telepathic communication, able to share thoughts across 50 miles using a specialized part of their brain, a faculty instantly lost when they surrendered to disobedience. Their children were educated at home in a uniquely vibrant way. The older taught the younger. The little ones shifted activities every 30 minutes, keeping learning dynamic and alive. And for the first time on Urantia, play was not merely instinct, but joy. Pure, exhilarating fun just for the sake of it. This tradition of laughter and leisure would echo down through the generations. Much of humanity's humor and musical appreciation comes from this Adamic lineage. Marriage, too, was taken seriously. Youths were betrothed at 18, followed by 2 years of preparation for the sacred responsibilities of family life. At 20, they married and began their life work. Even the custom of sibling marriages among early royal families finds its roots here. In the early garden generations, with no other pure stock available, Adam's descendants married one another, preserving the violet bloodline. And who performed these sacred ceremonies? Adam and Eve themselves, serving as both biological parents and divine guides for their children. This was not just a family, it was a divine experiment, a mission of upliftment. Though their task was disrupted, the legacy of Adam and Eve continues to ripple through human history, in culture, consciousness, and spirit. If this vision of Eden speaks to your soul, stay with us as we explore more of the truths revealed in the Urantia Book, a cosmic story waiting to be remembered. Until next time, seek truth, live love, and grow in light. In the spring of AD 22, Jesus embarked on an extensive journey across the Roman world, accompanying Gonod, a merchant from India, and his son, Ganid. Their travels took them from Jerusalem to various significant cities, including Alexandria in Egypt. Their time in Caesarea had been rich with experience, and when the ship was finally ready, Jesus, Gonod, and young Ganid boarded at midday and set sail across the Mediterranean toward the great city of Alexandria. The voyage was smooth and filled with lively conversation. Ganid, eager to learn, kept Jesus busy with endless questions, his wonder growing as they neared the harbor. As their ship approached, the towering lighthouse of Pharos came into view, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Perched on an island joined to the mainland by Alexander the Great, it stood as a beacon of hope and safety. Jesus pointed to the shining tower and said, "You, my son, will be like this lighthouse when you return to India, even after your father is gone. You will be a light to those in darkness, guiding them to the harbor of salvation." Ganid took his hand and said, "I will." Within hours of arriving, they settled near the city's Grand Avenue, a wide road that stretched for miles across Alexandria. They toured the royal palace, temples, and monuments, but it was the library that truly captured their hearts. The Alexandrian library held nearly 1 million manuscripts, wisdom from every corner of the world: Greece, Rome, India, China, even Japan. Here, Ganid found the largest collection of Indian literature he had ever seen. He and Jesus returned each day, exploring faiths and philosophies from every culture. Jesus explained how the Hebrew scriptures had been translated into Greek here, connecting Jewish faith to the wider world. He often reminded Ganid, Yahweh is the God revealed through Melchizedek and Abraham, the universal Father of all. Inspired, Ganid began collecting sacred teachings from every religion that acknowledged a supreme deity. They discovered that the Romans worshipped emperors, not a living God. The Greeks had deep philosophy, but little personal faith. And the mystery cults? Too many, too confused. Though their study began in Alexandria, Ganid didn't complete his collection until Rome. There he realized how many ancient voices shared the idea of one eternal God. Jesus and Ganid also spent hours at the museum, more like a university than a gallery. Scholars gave daily lectures on science and the arts. One day Ganid said, "Teacher Joshua, you know more than these professors. You should speak to them." Jesus smiled and replied, "You are a loyal student." But these men would not hear us. The pride of unspiritual knowledge is a dangerous thing. The true teacher always remains a learner. Alexandria was a melting pot of East and West. It held the world's largest synagogue, home to the city's Sanhedrin. Gonod met a Jewish banker, Alexander, whose brother Philo was a philosopher, trying to blend Greek thought with Hebrew belief. Jesus and Ganid hoped to hear him lecture, but he remained ill throughout their stay. Still, they studied his ideas. Jesus affirmed much of Greek and Stoic thought, but reminded Ganid, these systems only become religion when they lead people to know and experience the living God. And so, their time in Alexandria became a quiet but powerful chapter, one of learning, reflection, and deeper truth. In the cradle of the Nile Valley, where the river's lifeblood nourished the earth, the seeds of a great civilization were sown. The Urantia Book tells us that Egypt's origins were rooted in an evolutionary religion, a natural unfolding of human spirit and ingenuity, yet touched by distant influences. While much of the culture and religion of Egypt was derived from Andite Mesopotamia, there was a remarkable social and ethical idealism which arose as a purely human development within Egypt. For over 30,000 years, a steady stream of Mesopotamians poured into the Nile's embrace, bringing with them the arts of pottery, agriculture, and metalworking, enriching the fertile delta. Among these early arrivals were the broad-headed Nodite Andanite Syrians, who laid the foundations of a vibrant culture, their hands shaping clay and forging tools under the desert sun. By 5000 BC, Egypt had become a mosaic of 7 distinct peoples, all but one tracing their roots to Mesopotamia, rising as the new heart of advanced culture. Egypt was intellectual and cultural but not overly spiritual, the Urantia Book notes, yet it succeeded Mesopotamia as the center of the most advanced Andite culture. The Andites, skilled in river life and wielding iron from Mount Sinai, brought a surge of innovation. Among them stood Imhotep, an Andite whose genius birthed the first stone pyramid, a monument to Egypt's ambition that pierced the heavens. The sands of the Nile bore witness to a civilization ascending, its people weaving a tapestry of art, architecture, and thought. Religion, too, evolved along the Nile's banks. From the worship of nature and totem gods, the Egyptians began to glimpse a higher truth. The early Egyptian religion was strongly influenced by the political and moral tendencies of the Salem teachings, the Urantia Book reveals, guiding them toward a concept of a super-god, a precursor to monotheism. Teachers from the Second Eden and Melchizedek's headquarters at Salem arrived periodically, their words like sparks igniting moral and spiritual growth. This evolution was not merely divine but human, as the divine spirit indwelt the individual men and women who gave rise to the higher social and moral idealism of Egypt. The Hebrews, too, were woven into Egypt's story. Their time in the Nile Valley was a crucible of cultural exchange, for the Hebrews borrowed freely from the entire Egyptian culture and its associated mores as these were transmitted through their religion. Moses, a son of Egypt's royal lineage, drank deeply from its philosophical wells. Moses was educated in all the religious philosophy of the Egyptians, the Urantia Book declares, and from this wellspring he drew the moral currents that shaped Hebrew monotheism, forever linking the two peoples. Yet, as the sun of Egypt's glory rose, shadows of decline gathered. The Urantia Book recounts a time of strife along the Nile, where internal warfare resulted in Egypt being overrun by inferior tribes from Arabia and blacks from the south, plunging the land into a 500-year regression. By 6500 BC, the spiritual heritage of the Andites waned, their descendants scattered, and the culture of the sons of Adam was deteriorating. The decline of Mesopotamia around 5000 BC sent ripples to Egypt, as the influx of mixed and darker races further scattered the residue of Andite civilization. The once vibrant culture began to fray, its brilliance dimmed by external pressures and internal discord. Religion, the soul of Egypt, became its undoing. The bold vision of Akhenaton, who sought to crown Aton as the one true god, burned too brightly for its time. Akhenaton's teachings were too advanced for the masses and lacked political sagacity, the Urantia Book laments, and his reforms faltered. After his death, priests who had been cast aside during his reign seized power, blaming monotheism for Egypt's woes and restoring the old gods. The great mistake of Akhenaton in his procedure was the lack of material stability and political foresight, the text observes, sealing the fate of his monotheistic dream. Polytheism reclaimed the temples, and Egypt's spiritual light flickered. As Egypt's star waned, the Hebrews forged their own path, drawing from Egyptian wisdom, yet crafting a distinct faith. The Hebrews evolved their own concepts of God, moving away from the polytheism of Egypt, the Urantia Book notes, signaling a cultural shift that diminished Egypt's influence. The Nile, once the lifeblood of a mighty empire, now bore witness to its slow retreat into history's embrace, a civilization born of human striving and divine whispers, undone by the weight of its own ambitions and the tides of time. In the days when Rome stood at the height of its power, Jesus, Son of God, walked its streets, unknown and unheralded. He was not a senator, nor a soldier, nor a merchant of great wealth. He carried no symbols of power, no scrolls of law, no offerings for the gods. And yet, wherever he went, he left an indelible mark upon the souls of those he met. He came not to rule, but to serve, not to conquer, but to reveal the greater kingdom of the Spirit. By day, he wandered the marble-clad expanse of the Forum, where the voices of Rome's greatest orators thundered through the air. He stood before the temple of Jupiter, observing the grandeur of a civilization mighty in strength, but blind to the deeper truths of the universe. Upon the Palatine Hill, he walked among the palaces of emperors and scholars, seeking not their favor, but a deeper understanding of the people he had come to know and love. For 6 months, Jesus of Nazareth lived among the citizens of Rome, seeking not the company of the powerful, but of the weary and burdened. To a senator, he spoke of justice, and the man spent the rest of his days striving to reform the empire's laws. To a wealthy master of slaves, he spoke of the dignity of all men, and by the next morning, over 100 souls were set free. To a learned physician, he revealed a deeper calling, that a healer must tend not only the body, but the mind and soul. From that day forth, the doctor's hands worked with new purpose. One evening, as he walked along the Tiber with a Roman soldier, Jesus turned to the man and said, "Be not only strong of arm, but strong of heart. Let your strength serve justice, and let your hand be guided by mercy. Choose the noble over the base, the true over the false, and above all, love your fellow men. For God, the Father of all, calls you to a higher allegiance than that of Rome." In the forum, he listened to an orator whose words stirred the masses, but whose message was empty. "Your voice is strong, your reasoning sharp," Jesus told him, "but if you knew God as a Father, your speech would not merely entertain, it would set men free." That orator, Marcus, would one day stand with the persecuted and become a champion of the new faith, carrying forward a message the empire itself could not silence. When a poor man was unjustly accused, Jesus stood with him before the magistrate. Given the rare chance to speak, he declared, "Justice is the foundation of a great empire. A nation that favors the rich and powerful in its courts is doomed to fall. A judge must not only punish the guilty, but defend the innocent, for the endurance of civilization rests upon fairness and integrity." The judge, moved by his words, reopened the case, and the innocent man walked free. Yet Jesus did not only act in matters of law and philosophy. He found a lost child crying in the streets and took him by the hand. As they walked, he turned to his companion and said, "Most men are like this child, wandering in fear, though home is but a short distance away. To lead them back is not a duty, but a joy." That companion, young Ganid, never forgot this lesson and spent the rest of his life seeking out the lost to restore them to safety and love. He comforted a widow with 5 children, sharing with her the story of his own earthly father's passing. He and Ganid sought food and work for the family until their suffering was eased. That evening the boy's father, Gonod, laughed and said, "I wish to make my son a scholar or a merchant, yet you have made him a philosopher and a servant of men." Jesus smiled and replied, "Why not all 4? Then shall he find the fullest joy in life, just as a lyre sings best when all its strings are tuned." And so he lived, unnoticed by history's scribes, unrecorded by Rome's chroniclers, yet leaving an imprint upon all who crossed his path. He sought no throne, commanded no legions, and yet the light he kindled in the hearts of men would outlast the empire itself. Rome, vast and unyielding, would one day crumble, its banners turning to dust. But the truth he spoke, the love he embodied, these would endure, written not in stone, but in the souls of those who had seen the light of the living God. And so it was that Adam and Eve, the noble son and daughter of Jerusalem, found themselves not in a realm of order and light, but upon a world cloaked in confusion, isolated from the circuits of heaven. No broadcasts greeted them, No planetary prince stood in welcome, only silence and rebellion. Their first day ended not in triumph, but in sober realization. Hand in hand beneath the full moon, they walked the paths of Eden in quiet conversation, the stars above shining down on their solitary vigil. This was no ordinary mission. This was Urantia, a world wounded by betrayal. On the second day, they gathered with the Melchizedek receivers and advisors. From these ancient stewards they learned the true depth of Caligastia's rebellion, the unraveling of planetary progress, the collapse of false schemes, the folly of those who dared to defy divine order. It was a grim inheritance, yet they did not turn away. The third day brought a flight through the skies. Upon mighty Fandors, Adam and Eve beheld the vast garden below, a land forged in hope and devotion. That evening, a feast was held in honor of those who had kept Eden alive during the long night. But even celebration could not diminish the weight of the task ahead. On the fourth day, they stood before the people. From the inaugural mount, they declared their mission, to lift Urantia from the ashes of rebellion and restore her place in the divine plan. And as Eve stood beside Adam, not as a consort, but as an equal sovereign, the world witnessed a new light, the rise of true partnership. Never since the days of Dalmatia had a woman shared such authority. It was a new age. The fifth day was for government. They began the organization of a provisional administration, a bridge between celestial oversight and mortal stewardship. Then came the sixth day, a journey through the living panorama of Urantia's creatures. Along the eastern walls of Eden, they passed among animals, great and small, and to the astonishment of those present, Adam named them, each one, speaking not only their form, but their nature, their origin, their purpose. None knew he was one of Satania's greatest anatomists, and Eve no less so. The world had gained not just rulers, but masters of knowledge, and on the seventh day they sought rest. But rest would not come. The people had seen too much, heard too much. Their hearts overflowed with awe, and many stood ready not just to follow, but to worship. Thus ended the first week of Adam and Eve on Urantia, not with ease, not with comfort, but with the stirrings of something eternal, the rebirth of a planet. In the heart of the universe of Nebadon, where stars are born and spiritual civilizations flourish, there dwells a sovereign of rare distinction, Michael of Nebadon. To the people of earth, he is best known as Jesus of Nazareth. But long before he walked the hills of Galilee, he embarked upon a monumental journey of self-giving, a sacred mission undertaken by all Paradise Creator's sons, the bestowal experience. To qualify for full sovereignty over his universe, Michael chose to live as one with his own creatures, not once, but 7 times. Each bestowal was a descent from divine prerogative into experiential brotherhood, a gradual unveiling of supreme empathy and understanding. These were not symbolic acts, they were lived, real, and deeply transformative. His first bestowal was as a Melchizedek, one of a noble order of emergency sons known for wisdom and planetary service. Taking the form of a Melchizedek, Michael served with brilliance and humility. He became not just a counselor, but a friend to those he worked alongside, gaining insight into the spiritual administration of evolving worlds. In his second incarnation, he became a Lananandic son, an order tasked with system governance and planetary leadership. In this form, he entered the heart of local system administration, grappling with the intricacies of leadership, rebellion, and loyalty. Through this, he learned the burdens carried by those who mediate between higher mandates and the flawed realities of evolving worlds. Next, Michael lived as a material son, like the Adams and Eve sent to uplift primitive humanity. In this incarnation, he walked among material beings in the role of biological uplifter and cultural guide. He learned of the loneliness of those who fail to complete their missions and the patience needed when evolutionary time stretches far beyond mortal expectation. Then came the seraphic bestowal. As a ministering angel, Michael descended even further to serve the lowest of his spiritual children. He experienced life not as a ruler or teacher, but as a silent helper, a servant of destiny, an unseen hand in the lives of ascending mortals. From this, he gained an indelible understanding of faith, loyalty, and the quiet heroism of spiritual guardianship. In his fifth bestowal, he assumed the form of an ascending mortal, walking the path that human souls take toward paradise. He lived the uncertainty of the faith journey, the striving for truth, and the slow unfolding of spiritual identity. This was no shortcut. It was an immersion into the very pilgrimage that countless mortals undertake in trust and hope. The sixth bestowal was as a Urantia progressor, dwelling in the transition realm between matter and spirit. Here, Michael embraced the post-material journey, where personality integrates lessons from life into enduring values of soul. He tasted the blend of spiritual joy and mortal memory, learning what it means to grow beyond limitation while still cherishing the experiences of time. And then, finally, the seventh bestowal, the most profound and enduring, occurred on earth. As Jesus of Nazareth, Michael lived as a true mortal of the realm. Born into obscurity, he rose not through conquest, but through love. He taught not dogma, but truth illuminated by personal example. He revealed the nature of the universal Father through a life of unbroken trust, divine insight, and compassionate service. On Urantia, he brought his bestowal mission to fulfillment. Here, he reconciled divinity and humanity, not just in concept, but in the living bond of a person who was both Son of Man and Son of God. And through this final act, he earned full and supreme sovereignty over his universe, not by command, but by experiential love. Urantia is now the sentimental shrine of Nebadon, the world chosen for the culmination of a Creator Son's infinite condescension. It is forever honored, not only for the life lived there, but for what that life revealed, that the heart of God beats in rhythm with the hearts of his children. Thus completed, the seven bestowals of Christ Michael stand not only as a testament to divine humility, but as the framework of a universe governed in justice, mercy, and love born from lived experience. Through each descent, Michael rose, not above his creation, but within it, binding himself forever to the souls of time.
On the eve of their seventh day on earth, while Adam and Eve rested peacefully beneath the stars of Eden, a quiet storm stirred in the hearts of men. Around the Father's temple, bathed in the gentle glow of moonlight, hundreds gathered, their minds ablaze with wonder, their spirits lifted by awe. The arrival of the celestial pair had ignited a fire of hope, but also of misunderstanding. These garden dwellers were sincere, but their minds were unprepared for the simplicity and humility of divine leadership. They could not fathom rulers who walked among them as brothers, who spoke not with thunder, but with compassion. To them, such gentleness could only mean one thing: divinity in human form. And so, as the night deepened, a decision was reached. At high noon the next day, they would bring Adam and Eve to the mount, not to hear them, but to worship them. Van, the steadfast guardian of the ancient trust, stood against the tide of emotion. He warned them, pleaded with them, but his voice was dismissed. They declared that he too must be more than mortal. How else could one man endure for centuries, awaiting Adam's coming? In their fervor, they nearly swept him away for adoration as well. But Van slipped through the crowd and called upon unseen allies, the midway creatures who moved swiftly where men could not. His message raced to Adam and Eve, carried in the silent language of spirit urgency. Just before dawn, the pair awoke to the news. Even as birds were dispatched to carry them to the temple, the midwayers, moving faster than wings, transported them instantly to the sacred site. There, on the mount where they had first been received, Adam stood before the expectant multitude. With calm strength, he addressed them. "Only the universal Father is worthy of worship," he declared. "We are your guides, your servants in the great unfolding. We receive your honor, yes, but never your worship." The people listened, their hearts struck by truth. As the sun reached its zenith, and just as the heavenly messenger arrived from Jerusalem, confirming Adam and Eve's sovereign appointment, the pair turned toward the temple. "Go now," they said, "to the emblem of the Father's invisible presence. Bow down in reverence to the one who made us all, and let this be your vow, that never again will you be tempted to worship any but God." And they did. The people of Eden bowed in unison, faces to the earth, not before Adam and Eve, but before the Father's presence. Alone on the mount, the material son and daughter stood in silence, heads bowed with them. That sacred day became the origin of a cherished tradition, the Sabbath of Eden. Each seventh day henceforth was a day of wholeness, the morning devoted to care of the body, the noon to worship, the afternoon to enlightenment of mind, and the evening to the joy of fellowship. Thus, what began as confusion ended in clarity. A misstep was transformed into a milestone. The first upheaval, resolved not by force, but by the firm and loving wisdom of a Son of God.
When Adam and Eve arrived on Urantia, they brought with them more than just hope. They carried a divine mission to uplift humanity, to spark civilization, and to establish a new order grounded in wisdom, cooperation, and spiritual purpose. But what awaited them was not a blank slate. It was a battleground. Still present on the planet, though stripped of authority, was Caligastia, the devil, the once loyal planetary prince who had betrayed his commission during the Lucifer rebellion. With him was Daligastia, Satan, his companion in defection. Though invisible to mortal eyes, they were far from powerless, and they were not idle. Their opposition to Adam was not dramatic or open. It was subtle, calculated, and insidious. They sowed seeds of distrust. Where Adam taught unity, Caligastia whispered of division. Where Eve inspired cooperation, Daligastia planted the poison of pride. They preached the false promise of unrestrained personal liberty, freedom without structure, will without wisdom. And to the primitive minds of early humanity, this message often sounded more appealing than the call to responsibility and growth. Even within the Edenic circles, there were those who leaned toward the rebellion's ideology, souls confused by Caligastia's lingering influence, swayed by the seductive pull of doing whatever one pleased without concern for the greater good. These dissidents made Adam's work harder from within, just as Caligastia's agents stirred resistance from without. Adam tried to establish a world government, a federation of peace. But his emissaries were met with fear, jealousy, and defiance, all orchestrated from behind the curtain of invisibility. For every step forward, the forces of sabotage pulled civilization 2 steps back. And the tragedy of it all? Adam knew the enemy. He knew Caligastia. The devil himself was the hand behind the unrest, but he could not reveal him. Caligastia was invisible to mortal sight, and thus remained the perfect saboteur, ever present, never seen. This was the hidden war behind the Garden of Eden, not just a struggle of culture or evolution, but of spiritual insurgency, a war of ideologies, one side building toward divine harmony, the other slowly unraveling the tapestry of human potential. And in this clash of unseen forces, Adam and Eve stood at the center, carrying the light, even as the shadows closed in. The grand hall of Cana, filled with a scent of celebration, stood before the eyes of the gathered multitude. 1,000 souls, be they from Galilee, Judea, or beyond, had gathered in anticipation, drawn by the whispered promises of a day unlike any other. And amid them stood he, the one who was known yet unknown, whose presence stirred both reverence and expectation. Jesus of Nazareth, humble in countenance, was but a servant to his Father's will. Beside him stood his mother Mary, whose knowledge of her son's purpose was profound, and yet, like all those who walked in the shadow of divinity, still veiled in mystery. His apostles, brave yet still in the early stages of understanding, watched him, waiting for a sign. The celebration raged on, as it must. The wine flowed, the food was served, and laughter filled the air, a fleeting moment of joy in the tumult of mortal lives. But amidst this revelry, a crisis had quietly been set into motion. The wine, the symbol of life and joy, was running dry. Mary, ever perceptive, saw the undercurrent of panic in the hosts, their faces betraying the mounting pressure of impending social disaster. She turned to her son, her voice steady. They have no more wine. He, the Son of the Father, whose understanding of time and purpose stretched far beyond the mortal mind, regarded her calmly. What have I to do with you, woman? My hour has not yet come. Yet there was more than mere reluctance in his words. A pause, a moment of hesitation. He who was to change the very course of history stood at the crossroads of divine destiny, ever mindful of his Father's will. But Mary, understanding as only a mother could, spoke to the servants without further word. "Whatever he tells you, do it." The servants, now caught in the web of divine action, obeyed. 6 stone jars, vessels meant for purification, stood at the ready. He commanded them to fill them with water. A simple task, yet what might seem mundane was now to become the canvas for a divine act. The water, once drawn from these jars, was now transcended, into wine. Not merely any wine, but the finest wine, a symbol of abundance, of transformation, of what he, the master of the universe, could bring forth from the ordinary. The guests, oblivious to the source of the miracle, marveled at the unexpected quality of the wine. "You have kept the good wine until now," they exclaimed, not knowing that the best had only just begun. And so it was that Jesus, in his first public manifestation of divine power, performed a miracle, not to dazzle or to distract, but to show forth the eternal truth, that in the Father's will, even the simplest of things could be made extraordinary. The miracle was not for the crowds, it was for the few who would listen, who would see with eyes unclouded by doubt and hear with hearts attuned to his truth. The wedding at Cana was but a single thread in the vast tapestry of time, a moment in the long preparation for the unfolding of the eternal plan, yet it marked the beginning of a revelation of what was to come, of the power he held within him, a power not for the sake of power, but for the salvation of all. For he who had come to conquer not with force of arms, but with love, wisdom, and truth, had begun his work, and as he stood there, among his people, his apostles at his side, he knew that his path would lead him to many such crossroads, where his will would be tested, where his Father's plan would unfold, and where, in the end, the eternal victory of light over darkness would be realized. So it began, and so it would end, not in the pomp of earthly kings, but in the quiet, eternal triumph of the divine will.
Near sundown on August 12th, AD 29, the air grew still as Jesus and his apostles approached the rugged base of Mount Hermon. The mountain loomed above them, its peaks catching the last golden rays of daylight. Jesus turned to his companions, his gaze steady and purposeful, and chose Peter, James, and John to follow him up the winding path. The others remained below, sensing something momentous yet unspoken in their master's quiet resolve. The ascent was slow, the crunch of gravel underfoot mingling with the rustle of wind through sparse trees. As they climbed higher, the world below faded into shadow, and a profound silence settled over the group. Jesus led them to a secluded spot near the summit, where the air felt charged, as if the very stones anticipated what was to come. The 3 apostles stood close, their breaths shallow, watching as Jesus stepped apart, his figure outlined against the deepening sky. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A radiant light erupted from Jesus, not of this earth, a brilliance that seemed to pour from within him, transforming his face into a vision of celestial glory. His robes shimmered, whiter than any mortal cloth, as if woven from starlight itself. Beside him appeared 2 figures, luminous and majestic, Gabriel, the herald of divine will, and Father Melchizedek, ancient and wise, their presence a bridge between heaven and earth. The apostles stumbled back, their eyes wide with awe, their minds struggling to grasp the sight before them. As they gazed, dumbstruck, a vast cloud rolled across the summit, enveloping the scene in a shimmering mist. From its depths came a voice, deep and resonant, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "This is my beloved Son, give heed to him." The words pierced the air, a command and a revelation, echoing in the hearts of Peter, James, and John. They fell to their knees, trembling, overcome by the weight of divinity unveiled. The light softened, the cloud dissipated, and the celestial visitors vanished as swiftly as they had come. Jesus stood alone once more, his human form restored, though his eyes still held a trace of that otherworldly glow. He approached the apostles, who remained prostrate, their faces pressed to the earth. Gently, he touched their shoulders, his voice calm and steady. "Arise, and fear not." They looked up, blinking, and saw only their master, the mountaintop, now ordinary under the twilight sky. As they descended, the silence between them was thick with wonder. Jesus spoke again, his tone firm yet tender. "Tell no one what you have seen until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." The words hung in the air, a mystery they could not yet fathom. Step by step, they returned to the world below, carrying within them a vision of glory that would sustain them through the trials to come. In the early years of the 1st century AD, the eternal city of Rome stood as a crucible of power and culture, its streets alive with the clamor of empire. Into this vibrant tapestry stepped Jesus of Nazareth, his presence unheralded yet profound, as chronicled in paper 132 of the Urantia Book, The Sojourn at Rome. For 6 transformative months, he immersed himself in the city's heartbeat, engaging with souls from every corner of its vast dominion. 3 days after his arrival with Gonod, a merchant bearing greetings from India's princes, 2 Indian companions, Jesus stood before Tiberius, the Roman ruler. The emperor, often shadowed by a dull spirit, greeted them with an unexpected warmth that day. His throne room echoed with their voices as he spoke at length with the trio, his gaze lingering on Jesus, whose quiet dignity seemed to fill the space. When they departed, Tiberius turned to the aide at his side, a rare gleam in his eye. "If I had that fellow's kingly bearing and gracious manner," he mused, "I would be a real emperor, eh?" The words, half in jest, betrayed a flicker of awe, a testament to the impression Jesus left on Rome's mightiest. Beyond the palace, Jesus wove himself into the city's philosophical fabric. He sought out leaders of its diverse schools, Stoics, Cynics, and devotees of mysteries like Mithraism, each encounter a bridge between worlds. With Angamon, a Stoic of deep conviction, he sat beneath the stars, their dialogue a dance of ideas. Virtue, he urged, was the soul's alignment with the divine will, a truth that stirred Angamon's heart and later fueled his support for the nascent Christian flame. To the cynic Mardus, he spoke of good and evil as choices shaping eternity, while with Nabon, a Mithraic leader, he kindled a vision of faith as a living truth. These men, touched by his words, would one day carry his message into Rome's shadowed corners. Yet Jesus' ministry stretched far beyond these councils. He walked among the people, slaves with bent backs, merchants with laden carts, widows with empty hands, offering counsel as varied as their lives. To a wealthy Roman, he unfolded the ethics of riches, naming their sources from inheritance to labor, urging their use for good. To the downtrodden, he spoke of a peace born of faith, a beauty found in truth, a goodness woven into the fabric of existence. Over 500 souls crossed his path, each meeting a thread in a tapestry of compassion that defied Rome's rigid hierarchies. In these 6 months, Jesus laid a quiet foundation, his presence a seed beneath the empire's marble grandeur. The Stoics he inspired, the Cynics he challenged, the Mithras he enlightened, all became early voices of a faith that would ripple outward. Through personal ministry and philosophical exchange, he shaped the spiritual currents of the Western world, his sojourn in Rome a cornerstone for a message destined to transcend time and borders.